of these stories on these protests on campus. I love it. Everybody's got their think pieces on who should be doing what and who shouldn't be doing what. I could watch. Somebody's got to start. Is anybody doing a live stream of that? Just like a camera setup. You know how they have the camera set up to watch the pandas?
Yeah.
Or they've got the big fat bear cameras, right? Do this for campus protests all around the country. They had protests over at Case. They arrested more than 20 students over at Case Western over the demonstrations. More than 100 students began demonstrating in front of the library by noon. And then people, cops come in or the administration comes in, like, you can't set up tents. You can't make an encampment here. This is what, because there's a domino effect. Once you see it going on at one campus, starts with protests or taking over an administration building, which, if you're familiar enough with history to go far enough back to like protests on campus of the Vietnam War, it was way worse than this. They were setting stuff on fire. They were throwing bricks through windows. They were taking over full buildings. I was reading an article with Mark Rudd. This guy was one of the premier Vietnam War protesters back in 1968. And he said, today the kids are a lot smarter. The kids are a lot savvier now about this kind of stuff. And contrary to what you're seeing on television, he said, compared to the anti-war protests during Vietnam, the kids that are protesting now are largely peaceful protests. He said back then, he's like, we were, bombing buildings and stuff like that. He was one of the co-founders of the Weather Underground. If you go back to the late 60s, early 70s, if you're hip to those organizations, Tom Hayden and those people that were really instrumental in those anti-war protests. And they would stage what they called Days of Rage. And they would just smash store windows. They were setting pipe bombs at the Pentagon. 3 of them got killed when they were trying to put a bomb together in Greenwich Village. They were in their apartment, and the bomb went off. And so this guy's like, back in the 60s, it was a lot more in your face and violent than it is now. So kids now, even though everybody's giving them a hard time, my thought is always that, like, when you're in college, this is what you're supposed to do. This is the time to do it. You might not be a student of history because you're 18, 19 years old. You might not know chapter and verse of the history of Israel or Palestine or whatever. But I always thought, I think it's a little disingenuous when people get mad at college kids. They're like, oh, these sheltered kids who blah, blah, blah. That's what college is. College by design. For anybody who's ever gone, college by design is like this little bubble that you're living in for a while that is separate from the outside world. That's what they are specifically. And so there's something disingenuous about criticizing college kids for being sheltered, because college is where we told them to go. That's where college kids are. And so political protests on campus, that's where they're supposed to happen. And if you're paying for school, this notion that you don't get to ask any questions about where your money is going, all of our money, taxpayers, our money goes to stuff all the time that we don't want. They want people kicking in another $1 billion to fix up Brown Stadium or whatever nonsense is going on over there.
In Brook Park?
Well, the one on the lake. They're like, hey, either fix this one up or, right? The city owns the one on the lake. So they're like, hey, you know how we fleeced you guys for money for renovations 10 years ago? 10 years ago. Remember how we hit you guys up for 15 years worth of renovations? Yeah, we'd like some more. And you probably won't have much to say about it. So if you're paying to go to college, You're going to be in debt the rest of your life, by the way. So you've bought your ticket for a seat at the table. And so, like, campuses and universities have always been the center of this stuff. And if you bring in, I don't understand what these colleges are doing. They're like, we're going to expel students that are out on the, quad or whatever.
It doesn't make sense to me either.
I love it.
Only because it's like, I don't know. And you kind of touched on it, but it's like I feel like college is the time to figure out where you stand, how you feel.
Yes.
Like it's you're coming away from your parents' beliefs, right? Or at least for me it was. I was really raised so religious and so right-wing and everything like that going to college and meeting a bunch of people, you think they would encourage independent thinking and like, hey, yes, this is okay. Yes, you're not hurting anybody. I don't know. It seems weird to me to want to.
Now, this is not to say that there has not been violence on campus in these protests. I'm not saying that. But it largely has not been violent. And it's also interesting to me because, Ohio State, huge school, and they were having a lot of problems with this too. And the school is really cracking down. And I got to tell you, especially in Ohio, I'm really surprised to not see Republicans coming to the defense of these protesters. Because you might recall, Republicans were the ones that wanted to pass all these laws about what universities could and couldn't accept on campus. Now, they did that because of this nonsense that campuses were, they're silencing conservative voices. So they enacted all these laws. So I'm really surprised now that I don't see them coming to the defense of these protesters. I guess it's maybe they're not concerned about the law, if it's somebody they disagree with, but you guys wanted this law to tell universities what to do. So calling in the cops, that doesn't seem, you guys wanted free speech. That's what this is. So it's interesting to see how it lays out.
Well, there's always, with anything like this, there's always a lot of, we encourage a lot of independent thinking and, discourse and stuff like that. And then they do it a certain way. They go, no, not like that. Like, that's always, they always want some aspect of control when it comes to these things. And when they don't get it, they complain.
I was reading a thing in the LA Times about protests at UCLA. A friend of mine does grad school work at UCLA. And he was like, it's funny how obviously, depending on what your source is, how the reporting can be. And they were talking about how huge groups of counter demonstrators were showing up on campus at UCLA, wearing black outfits and white masks. It's like, guys, who do you think those people are, by the way? Those are people showing up itching to kick some ass. They don't have a dog in the Israel-Gaza fight at all. You're going to have people on campus looking to break some skulls. So I don't know if people are pointing out to Ohio State University that, hey, you guys might be in violation of some laws that the state legislature actually passed to make sure that they were taken care of. Well, now it applies to other people. But I could watch it all day long. That's why I think maybe we're framing this whole argument the wrong way. When people throw words like genocide around and things like that. Maybe we're framing it completely the wrong way. Maybe we need to point out how many animals are being killed over there. Because look what happened to Kristi Noem. You know who Kristi Noem is?
Yeah,
she's
the dog killer.
Well, that's kind of what she is now, yeah. She's trying to get on Trump's shortlist for VP, and this might do it. But she is the governor of South Dakota. And she voluntarily put in her memoir how she killed a puppy because it was
untrainable.
Untrained. It couldn't be trained, right? It was a pain in the ass.
It was, she tried for like a whole day. She tried almost a whole day, and she's like, this puppy can't be trained. I got to kill it.
It was like an 18-month-old puppy or something like that.
How old was she?
I don't know.
She did
Does that matter?
No, this is an adult.
This was last year.
No, this was her as an adult, I believe.
When they say when kids torture animals is a sign of being a serial killer. I'm like, was this something she did when she was like 8, and she's like, hey, I used to be messed up, and now I'm trying to grow out of that, or is it like this is something I did 6 months ago? I feel like there's a difference in that.
Yeah, there is a difference, but I don't think that's what it was. She took her dog Cricket on a bird hunting trip with older dogs in hope of calming her puppy down, and said that, this dog is untrainable. And this dog is going to be a real pain in the ass. And this dog's not going to, whatever it was. And so she led the dog into a gravel pit and killed her. She also shot the family goat because it was mean to her, right?
Yeah.
So maybe but what I'm saying is, look what happened to her. She is now like universally reviled. Bipartisan condemnation for Kristi Noem because it was an animal. And so maybe all of these conflicts should be reframed to point out and spotlight how many animals are being killed. Because that seems to really
Not a bad idea.
get people, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, you're right.
Human beings are so cruel to one another. It always surprises me
There's not a website.
how much compassion they work up for animals.
There's not a website called Does the Wife Die?
What is that?
There's a website for movies called Does the Dog Die?
Oh, Does the Dog Die?
Yeah, you can read it before.
Mm-hmm.
Any
and
movie
find
with a
out if the
dog,
dog
you check
dies.
that out?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't want to watch it because the dog dies, you don't have
Is it pretty 50-50 or is it just a free-for-all over there? Because there's, Old Yeller, most people know how that ends. Marley and Me, most people know how that ends. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. You'll have to go to doesthedogdie.com. So, yeah, I don't know. But somebody, because this is not going to stop on campus, nor should it. But somebody needs to have 24/7 live streams of these things. And I'm not even going deep in the weeds on it. I know there's much more nuanced arguments about what should or shouldn't be happening with rabid anti-Semitism. I'm not even talking about that. That stuff's gross from the jump. That stuff is gross in any environment. But college is really the place. And so when schools are like cracking down on students that are paying them to go there, you've put your money in to tell them you don't have a say in what happens here, or you don't get to ask questions about blah, blah, blah. Because that's what these protests are, right? The big signs. Columbia funds genocide. Or UCLA, take your pick of whatever signs people are holding up.
I got an update on the Kristi Noem thing. It was in the past few years that she killed that dog.
The past few years.
That's insane.
So she was in her mid-40s.
Yeah.
Because she's my age.
You know full well what you're doing.
And how old are you, Alan? When's your birthday?
Bill, I'm not going to tell you. And
$1,000. Like Mary's not committed to get us $1,000.
I'm going to give somebody $1,000. It's from the Buzzard Bookie. Doesn't matter when your birthday is. Today might be your birthday, and you win $1,000. So good luck.
This is your chance to bet with the Buzzard Bookie and win $1,000 now. Enter this nationwide keyword at WMMS.com. Money. That's money. Enter it now at WMMS.com.
Alan, most of the protesters on college campuses are not even students. I don't know if most. Obviously, nature abhors a vacuum, right?
I think the ones causing the agitation on either side are mostly not students.
Probably. Yeah, there's some people, like I said, there are people who see a crowd and they call them agitators, right? You get in there, and I don't think they're checking IDs.
Well, some places they are.
Yeah.
Now they're like, hey, we're going to let people protest, but we're going to check IDs and we're going to make sure, everyone's safe.
Yeah. The big issue people are having with the protests is all the anti-Semitism. That is true. But again, there are a lot of nuances to these things, right? One of my son's best friends works for Netflix, and she's Palestinian. So if you were to talk to her...
What part of Netflix? Give us a number here. Mary and I have been trying to get on there for years.
Yeah, seriously, dude.
What the hell?
To talk to her, there are a lot of questionable comments she makes about people of Jewish nationality. they don't, because that's, her family grew up with that kind of, it's nothing that leans into really gross commentary, but they're very obviously pro-Palestinian. So when something like this flares up, it gets a lot of people's hackles up. Somebody texted that Chrissy Nome was in her 20s.
Okay.
But if this happened last year, she would have been in her 40s. Even if she was in her 20s.
Even if she's in her 20s, it's not great. It's not a great thing.
6 or 7.
Yeah. It's not. Killing a dog that way because it's untrainable is just a wild thing to do. And just like throwing it in a dog pit and shooting, or a gravel pit and shooting it, rather than like trying to rehome it or trying to bring in a trainer or work with it. That's just, a psychotic thing to do.
Great thing to remember. Somebody reminded me on the text. Shot, don't adopt. This dog also butchered 10 chickens at a neighbor's farm. Not justified to kill it, but more than just untrainable. Yeah, well, listen.
Butchered
maybe, chased them and ate them.
Yeah.
Maybe you find a farm that's got too many chickens.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you find a place that has too many chickens and you go, I'm sending this dog up there. The dog's going upstate.
I feel like if you would have called the dog whisperer Cesar Millan, he would have had a real good time. We made a very special episode where he didn't have to shoot the dog in a gravel
The
pit.
untrainable South Dakota dog.
Right.
Stephen Canton wants to know if Air Bud dies. No, I've never seen Air Bud. Well, you know what? I'm going to say he doesn't, because didn't they make 6 or 7 of those goddamn things?
Could be different.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I don't know. I've never seen Air Bud either.
I saw somebody made a meme of Paul Thomas Anderson's Air Will Be Bud. It was the dog with that old-timey font and Daniel Day-Lewis in the background. I'm like, now that is quality comedy. Yeah.
You have a peanut butter treat, and I have a peanut butter treat. I eat your peanut butter treat.
Yeah.
I eat it up.
That's right. Alan, Jewish is not a nationality, it's a religion. Of course it is. Judaism is a religion, but those people identify with that part of the Middle East. They identify with a geography. Obviously, there are a lot of, non-practicing Jews in this country. There are a lot of Jews who don't so closely identify with the state of Israel, but a lot of them do. And so this idea that people have to be anti-Semites to ask that there isn't a mass murder of Palestinians, it gets really, really hairy. But the bottom line is you cannot hold college students to the same standard that you would.
Jews.
Huh?
Oh.
You can't hold people make fun of college kids because they don't know anything. That's low-hanging fruit. You're trying to learn things. And the bottom line part of it, too, is who in college, other than, like the campus Republicans or whatever, but everybody else in college is trying to go a completely opposite direction from their parents. So
Not everybody.
Not everybody, but that's kind of where you figure out where you are. If you grew up with conservative parents, religious or otherwise, most people go the opposite direction.
I disagree with that. I don't think there's a lot of people that go the opposite direction. They might not be as enthusiastic about it, but there's a lot of people that just fall in. They're like, well, this is what my parents believed. I'm going to believe the same thing. And they go to college and they absolutely just, it's more of a tradition than a belief, but they stick with it. I think that's a lot of people.
Well, I don't disagree, but I also think that if you're going to do it, it's when you go to college. Or when you become an adult. You know what I mean? Like, I was still pretty Catholic when I was in college. I didn't even come out to my mom as an atheist until like 2 years ago. So, yeah, you can do it. But eventually, the more you're around and you go, wow, none of this makes sense or is relevant to modern day life.
How did she react? Was she like, oh, my God? And you're like, Mom, what did I just tell you?
No, she kind of got all wide-eyed, and my siblings all gasped. Yeah, there was an audible gasp in the room. Not that they didn't, whatever. It's not like this is big reveal or anything. I'm sure if I had pressed my mom, she would have been like, no, not happy about it, but okay. Oh, I got a break. You want those Aerosmith tickets? I will give them to you right now. Aerosmith is calling it quits. And I think that they had to kick this can down the road because of COVID. I think they were going to call it quits a few years ago. But the Aerosmith Farewell Tour comes to the Romo Fijo on September the 29th. It's a Sunday night with the Black Crowes.